Good morning. Right, yeah, so as it's billed, it's the can you look dapper while wearing a cap? What I really mean is, can you call yourself a decentralized application if everything depends on an app, centralized app running on a centralized server, which is a single point of failure? So to set the scene, let me go back and say, what is Web3? Because the definition of this word seems to have changed over the years. If we go back, today, you'll ask people what is Web3, and they think it's pretty much any web app whatsoever, with the one criterion is that it somewhat interacts with MetaMask. And they completely ignore whatever architecture it's running on. That seems to be the criterion. But that wasn't originally the case. That wasn't what it was meant to be. If we go back to the prehistory, 2014, 2015, the very beginning of Ethereum, you'll see architecture diagrams that look somewhat like this. The blockchain is there as just one coordinating layer, but the Web3 is a completely separate web running over encrypted peer-to-peer connections, doesn't ever have to interact with the old web. Here's an example of how that might work. There's a special browser, the Mist browser, where you could write things, let's just say blog.colony.eth. A very simple content you want to read. What would happen is, well, in those days, we all had an Ethereum node running on our laptops, or at least a light node. So that connects to other Ethereum light nodes with encrypted peer-to-peer channels, so you have access to transactions and state. I mean, that exists today, that network. We just don't run it on our laptops. On this Ethereum state, there's the ENS. In the ENS, you look up the name, and it gets resolved to a hash. This hash guarantees that whatever content you get matches this signature of whoever owns the domain. This BZZ is a swarm hash. You'd get the content from the swarm network, which is not a separate network. At the time, the exact same peer-to-peer connections that handle transactions and blocks also handled swarm. And that network would give you the content, and you would be able to read our blog. And this whole thing would happen without ever touching the regular web. And of course, seeing as we have a blockchain, this new web could do other things as well, like finance, insurance, governance, voting. These are some early concepts of what dApps might look like. This is from the very beginning. It's actually interesting to go back to see how many of these things exist and how many don't. But anyway, so that was sort of this vision of Web3, and completely independent. Swarm for data, Ethereum for the finance and consensus, and Whisper, I didn't talk much about, for direct communications, like real-time chat, that kind of thing. So where are we? Well, Whisper was built. It was highly optimized for anonymous communication, and it had performance and scalability issues. It never really took off because of those. So it was eventually dropped from Geth and from other clients, and yeah, it never got used. Swarm. I was on the Swarm team for many years. We did build for a long time. There were performance and scalability issues there too. And one of the things that happened early on was that it was split out from Geth and Ethereum to run its own separate network with its own connections. And it was no longer used for serving Ethereum blocks and Ethereum state. So it was built separately. It's still in development. The team, after I left in 2019, started a complete rewrite, and now that's bearing fruit. They have a new client, desktop app. They're redeveloping those ideas. It just takes a long time. This is a really hard project. And they use Gnosis Chain for their payments and incentives. So there's no longer as tightly coupled to Ethereum. And that's because Ethereum also had performance and scaling issues, which of course I don't need to tell people here. And we certainly all stopped running Geth nodes on our laptops. So all that put together is how you end up here. And we at Colony, we've been in this space since the very beginning, and we tried also very hard to make that original vision happen. Writing an app that uses only peer-to-peer technology, does not need any servers, does not have single points of failures. And this entire space, all the tooling needed to be built, like Ethereum tooling. For 20 years or more, we've developed server-side technology, and there's thousands of companies working in the space. Here, everything was new. So it took a tremendous effort of our team and the rest of the community to get these things off the ground. We built this app. This is a really old slide of mine announcing it. We still used a server to distribute the app because so all that people saw was you type the app address, colony.io, and it loads up. And all this engineering that went into making this peer-to-peer app possible is completely invisible to the user. Mostly what they saw is an app that sucked. It was really slow. Data was missing, it was unresponsive, not a good experience at all, even though it was a tremendous effort to get that far. This quote, by the way, is from our very own blog, where we announced that we'd rewritten it to use server-side technology. But I'll get to that later. For the moment, let's say, why do we want this? What is it about Web3, this peer-to-peer world, that made us put in so much effort to try to get it done, even though it was so painful? There's a lot of reasons. Web3 has a million really cool features, and a lot of them get lost when we go back to this server architecture. But the one I want to focus on today is this thing of unstoppable applications. Unstoppable applications was one of the first promises of Ethereum when launched, this idea that once an app is launched in this network, you can't shut it down. Your government can't decide, oh, you're not allowed to use this Twitter app, and then turn it off in your country or region. The only way you could stop it is if you stop the entire network. Right? And as long as people still want to use it, it's up. Like even ETC chain is still up because people want to use it. You cannot force stop these things. But of course, users don't speak EVM. Like you need an application, so the servers, if we use them for access to apps, are a single point of failure. And in the original vision with the Mist browser, all these apps running on the peer-to-peer Swarm network would also not be stoppable. The data would still be out there and cannot be forcibly deleted as long as people want to use it. By the way, this video of Ethereum in 2014, still on YouTube, interesting to see nowadays. It was just a pitch, what the future might look like. Right, so the fact that it's on the blockchain is necessary, but it's not sufficient. You need an app that's also accessible. And if we don't have it on a peer-to-peer network, well, what can we do? Here's an idea. Maybe dApps should be downloadable apps. So I'm going to use the example of MyCrypto. MyCrypto is a great app. I used to love using it early on. These days, less so, because I have no need for it right now. But there's a web app. Here's the 2017 version. It's still on the web today. 2017.mycrypto.com. Don't use it, right? But there's a web version and there's a downloadable version. You can run it on your desktop, locally. And if the web server ever disappears, well, you still have the app. So at least you have the guarantee that they can't shut you down. They can't stop you from accessing this app, which accesses data from the peer-to-peer network. Now, unfortunately, that app disappeared. They don't maintain it anymore. A lot of others have gone, sadly. Shout out to NoSysSafe. There's a downloadable version of that, which is great. I love that. Maybe want to point out down here, all releases, these SHA-256 checksums, those things that you all ignore, that show you that you've actually downloaded the real thing. That's important. That would have been built in the Mist browser. And even more so, because it got the hash from the ENS, it was like a signed signature. So we have lost something by doing it by hand. But that they're downloadable, it's great. Other apps, Rotkey, local first, great stuff. But not everything is so amenable to that pattern. And anyway, a lot of these apps disappeared, and I wanted to find out why. So I sent an email to Taylor from MyCrypto, just asking, what was it that made them stop. And Taylor's great, but very busy, and I didn't really expect her to have a lot of time for me. But she did respond, and I wanted to share that answer in full because I loved that answer, what she sent me. So she responded. She sent me an email, and the email in full is this. That's it. No greetings, no anything, just that. This is an email with a link to a tweet. Done. Right? It's a tweet, by the way, of the lead developer of the Mist browser, Alex van der Sand, and that tweet itself just contains a link to a Google Drive containing a single PDF document. This PDF document is of a security audit that the Ethereum Foundation commissioned on Mist. And the way that worked, the auditors found mistakes, the Mist team fixed them, they found some more mistakes, the team fixed them, and the errors they found got worse and worse and worse and more severe, and it had nothing whatsoever to do with the Mist team. They found severe problems in the underlying software stack, Electron in this case. So it's 30 years of working on server-side apps means there's a lot of hardening that went in there. Downloadable apps just don't have that much history. They weren't safe. And that's why my crypto stopped doing it. That's why the Mist browser was discontinued. They just determined it's impossible to do it. And Brave also used to use this technology, and they rewrote their engine to just use Chromium. So that killed that. So is it all about security? Well, I asked Alex, I called him, and we talked about all these things. He said, yeah, well, there were also, that certainly was the first reason. But on the horizon, he also saw some performance and scalability issues coming up, the same ones that Colony, the original Colony app, hit. Anyway, so maybe we could have multiple independent servers. Maybe that gives you some kind of control that they can't all be shut down, some redundancy. This is a pattern, by the way, that works very well with email. You can have multiple email providers. Anyone have this email provider? Maybe some of you do. Maybe some have a more security-conscious one. This is great. Chat, less so. In Germany, people use this a lot, even though it's kind of a privacy nightmare. Crypto, people use this, even though it's not really encrypted. Some people, oh my God, you've got relatives. Maybe they should all use Signal, but then you need a phone number, whatever. So this is harder, but actually it is possible to do encrypted, the same pattern as for email with chat. It's called Matrix. You can have multiple providers there as well. And if one email provider stops, the email app, the email network doesn't shut down. However, if they do shut down, you're still screwed. You have to change all your logins, tell everyone you have a new ID, and it's a pain. Like, what consolation is it to you that email still exists if your email disappears? But there is a way you can protect yourself against this particular failure mode, which is if you have your own domain name. This is crucial. If you have your own domain, you can still use Gmail and have them host your mail, but with your own name. So you'd look in the DNS, it says, who's responsible for your email. Google gets sent there, and if one day they decide to stop, or you wake up and say, hey, I can't with good conscience keep my email with Google, you can switch your provider and nobody needs to know. Same is true for Matrix. If you can find a provider that allows you to use your own domain, there's not that many, but it should work, right? So this is a great pattern. What I want to focus on is this, how important it is to start up with first having your own domain before you set up in order to protect yourself against this failure mode. And what we should be working on as a community is this. That should be the single point of entry, at least for communication apps. And I'm very pleased to hear that ENS is working on standardizing something, DM3 it's called. It's a great initiative to allow us to use, especially communication apps, where your ENS name is that first point of entry, and it points you to where your particular app is hosted at the time. So this is great for communication apps, less so for Colony. Colony, big governance platform. Of course, we'd like to get integrations of Colony with other apps, and they will happen. And we also see integrations of things like currency swaps being integrated into wallets, but nothing on the scale of Colony yet, and we can't wait for that. And there isn't really a natural candidate for somebody else to run the Colony application on a different server. It's kind of awkward, so what do we do? Well, here's a new idea. You could run your own servers. Now, actually, let me level with you. It's not a new idea. Geeks have been trying to get people to run their own servers forever, and it never works. Maybe this time is different. One thing that could give you hope is DappNode. Fantastic project. If you haven't played around with it, please do. It's really empowering. You get a DappNode, it looks like this, tiny little box. You can run it at home. And the reason it's different from configuring your own mail server is that the interface is really easy. Right, by the way, that's their new logo. I couldn't find DappNode. Put your logo on the website to download, please. So this is what it looks like when you're actually using it. Right? It's a single click, a few configuration options, and you're running an ETH node. You're running a Swarm node. You're running Bitcoin. You're running IPFS. And it's configured so that wherever you are in the world on your laptop, you will phone home to your little node and use that to enter the peer-to-peer network. This is great. And it's accessible because it's really easy to do. So what this setup allows, it allows us to run the app on the Colony server, and it allows you to run it at home. And the user here, represented by the alliance of two foxes, does not, could use either one. Feel free to replace two foxes with a lion. their pod equivalent in this picture. And so it could be almost the same app running on both. Maybe there's a few configuration changes on the server side. It doesn't matter. This is sort of the architecture we'd been going for a while. So same pattern here. If the server disappears, you still have access as a user to Colony. Yeah, that's sort of what I was just saying. Importantly, it allows the server to do a lot of number crunching and calculations and database work that was so detrimental to the performance of the original app where everything had to be done in browser. So, it's much more snappy, much more responsive, and it would remain usable even if Colony disappears. I should mention we don't actually have a DappNode app, but I'll get to why. We will have in the future, I hope. Anyway, this is what it looks like. When we first started, it looked like this. Again, very similar to the app before, because all the changes are in the background. It's invisible to the users, which is why you don't get a lot of reward for doing it right, because most people can't even see the difference. But there we have it. Web3 is saved. Huzzah! Except, well, there were some issues here too. Performance and scaling issues. What we found is that, well, I don't want to talk about UX issues, but performance and scaling. Like you say, why? I just told you server-side tech is so much more developed and you don't have the same problems as trying to do everything locally. It's true, but when you write an app that scales to thousands of users on a server, you're not going to write it in the same way as you would for a DappNode, right? The designs there are actually different. And what we've discovered the hard way is we really need to use Amazon and Infura and all these centralized technologies if we are to run an app on our server that hundreds of people can use and that's snappy and fast, because this software stack is just so much more developed. And there's nothing to do about it. Scaling is what these companies do. That's the product they sell, and we can't do it all ourselves. But I want to argue that it is OK to do that as long as there is also this Dapp, as long as there is the local version you can run. You don't really need to care how the server is running and how the DappNode is running, as long as both exist and they both just pull in data from peer-to-peer sources, so the exact same, you're not losing out by not being on the server. And that's sort of my pitch. That's sort of what we're developing now. The key is to architect this centralized app in such a way that you can easily reconfigure it and also publish a localized version that anyone can run on a DappNode. And so that's my pitch. That's how you can be Dapper while wearing a cap. In a sense, as long as the decentralized app exists, you're allowed to do on your server what you want, at least in this context of unstoppable applications, like the guarantee that you are not a single point of failure. That's at least one of the important aspects of the original Web3 that we can save. Anyway, so that's Colony. I know this is the governance track, and governance in this space often means who has control over tokens, who has control over funds. But I want to argue that who has control over access to the app in the first place is also a really important consideration. So that's my pitch. That's what we've been working on. That's what's going on at Colony, and I hope very much to be able to announce a DappNode version sometime. It's like something that's dear to my heart. But it's really hard to please everyone and to actually get performant apps, especially in a space where you have to write all the tooling as you go along. But it's exciting times, and yeah, let's keep building. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aron. We have time for a Q&A.
I just had a quick look on your website. I haven't seen that before, so it looks nice to me. How are you earning money? Because I haven't seen anything like pricing, and you even mentioned that there's no subscription fee. So how is it working?
How do we make money? There's a question of who we is in this context. So the network of colonies, of these DAOs, are coordinated by one colony called the Meta Colony. And we, as the team who originally built it, are working for the Meta Colony. The Meta Colony had a token sale and raised quite decent amount of money earlier this year. There's also a mechanism by which all colonies in the network can pay fees to the center, but they're set incredibly low right now. There are various mechanisms in place for, various revenue models. At the moment, we're being paid by the treasury of the Meta colony as it stands. But yeah, that's the short of it. And it's not yeah, so that's it. I want to ask, who's us? The Meta colony can decide to pay people and can decide to raise funds from other colonies as needed, but we don't have that need right now. Also, there's not that much money flowing in various colonies right now, and we want people to be able to experiment cheaply and easily, because any fees there would probably slow the growth and the early adoption, at least. It's also, we've moved most of this onto Gnosis chain. We used to be on mainnet until deploying a colony there started costing thousands of dollars. So now we're on Gnosis chain, so it's now cheap and fast. And we're also thinking about how we could do a multi-chain version. And the difficulty there is we have a reputation system, which then has to keep track of what all the colonies are doing on all the different networks. But yeah, being cheap and easy is far more important for us right now than using this to raise a lot of funds. Yeah, any other questions? If you hadn't seen it, Colony's been around forever, but we're kind of in stealth mode always. I'm always happy to get new people coming in and playing around with this stuff. It's a very flexible framework, and while we are building a reference application, we do envision these tools to be integrated into. So if you're working on a governance tool, just like a task management thing or some other time management, you could integrate with Colony to do your accounting and some governance backends. So definitely open to that. So always happy to have new people come in. So thank you.
I think if there are no more questions, that's it for Aron. Thank you so much.